My name is Evelyn Carter, 72 years old, born and raised on the west side of Atlanta. I've lived long enough to bury a husband, raise a son, and build a soul food restaurant chain that fed half the city and finally sold for $18 million. At my age, people expect me to knit scarves, rock on the porch, maybe fade quietly into the background. But let me make one thing clear. I did not survive segregation, single motherhood, and 40 years of business wars just to be taken out by anybody's foolishness. That night, my retirement party was supposed to be a celebration. Laughter bounced off the chandeliers. Gospel jazz filled the air, and neighbors clinked glasses in my honor. But celebrations have a way of showing you who's really smiling at you and who's sharpening knives behind your back. I was standing near the buffet when it happened. 1 second, Ruby Johnson, my daughter-in-law's mother, and a woman I'd known for decades, was lifting her glass of red wine, grinning ear to ear. The next, her body stiffened, her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed hard onto my polished oak floor. Guests screamed, chairs toppled, somebody yelled for 911. Foam gathered at Ruby's lips, her heels kicking helplessly. And me? I didn't scream. I didn't faint. I just stood there thinking, Lord have mercy. That drink wasn't meant for Ruby. Because 30 minutes earlier, I had watched Monique, my oh-so-charming daughter-in-law, slip something from her purse and pour it into that very glass, the one she had set aside for me. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I was born in Atlanta in 1950, back when our side of town was little more than shotgun houses, dusty streets, and the smell of fried catfish drifting out of church basements on Sundays. I was the youngest of 6, raised by a mother who worked 2 cleaning jobs, and a father who played the blues on his guitar whenever he wasn't too tired from the factory. Life wasn't easy, but nothing about being black in the South back then ever was. At 19, I married my high school sweetheart, Charles. He was a dreamer with a laugh that could light up a room, but the Lord took him early, leaving me a widow with a baby boy, Darius, and no roadmap for survival. That should have been the end of my story. Instead, it was the start of something bigger. I opened a tiny soul food diner on Auburn Avenue with money I scraped together from church donations and a loan that nobody thought I'd ever pay back. Fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread, the kind of food that sticks to your ribs and reminds you who you are. 40 years later, that one-room diner grew into a chain of 6 restaurants, beloved across Atlanta. Last month, I signed the papers and sold it all. $18 million. Not bad for a woman who once served plates for nickels. So yes, I'm 72. My hair is silver. My hands ache when the weather changes. But don't let that fool you. I didn't get here by being naive. I see people's eyes when they look at my bank account. I know greed when I smell it, and it smells the same as it did 50 years ago, like smoke before a fire. And on the night of my retirement party, I smelled it thick in the air. The night of my retirement party should have been one of the happiest evenings of my life. We rented out a rooftop event space overlooking downtown Atlanta, where the city lights glittered like scattered diamonds. Family, old friends, and business partners gathered to toast to my new chapter. Laughter rolled across the room. Jazz hummed softly in the background, and the scent of champagne floated in the air. On the surface, it was perfect. But I've lived long enough to know when something doesn't sit right, and something about my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, wasn't sitting right with me. Normally, She couldn't be bothered to plan Sunday dinner, let alone a party of this scale. Yet here she was, gliding across the floor like a pageant queen, arranging flowers, adjusting the dessert table, and fawning over every guest. She was too polished, too eager, and her smile never quite reached her eyes. I noticed the way she kept checking her purse, pulling it open just enough to glance at something inside. The way she steered conversations toward my sale, $18 million spoken of with the kind of awe usually reserved for gospel choirs and miracles. And then there was my son, Darius. Sweet, loyal Darius. But that night, his laugh was brittle, his shoulders tight. He avoided my gaze more than once, like a boy hiding a broken window. It hit me then. This party wasn't just about celebrating me. It was about something else. Something planned. I couldn't put my finger on it yet. But I knew greed when it brushed against me. I'd seen it in boardrooms, in contracts, in the hungry eyes of competitors who would have chewed me up if I let them. And as I raised my glass to the crowd, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just being honored that night. I was being targeted. I didn't plan to catch her, but life has a way of showing you the truth when you least expect it. About halfway through the party, I was talking with an old colleague from my consulting days when I noticed Vanessa near the champagne table. The rooftop lights flickered against her sequined dress, making her look like she belonged in some glossy magazine spread. But her hands told a different story. They were trembling, deliberate, and far too focused for someone simply fixing a drink. She glanced around, once, twice, like a child sneaking cookies from a jar, before pulling a small vial from her clutch. My stomach knotted. Even from across the room, I knew what I was watching wasn't innocent. She tilted the vial carefully, emptying its contents into one single glass. Not just any glass, my glass. The one with the tiny chip on the rim that I always insisted on using, no matter how many times my family tried to replace it. My pulse slowed, a strange calm washing over me. I'd spent decades in boardrooms where men twice my size tried to outwit me. If business had taught me anything, it was that panic is the enemy of power, so I smiled, nodded politely at my colleague, and kept my eyes locked on Vanessa. Moments later, she approached me, her voice dripping with sweetness. "Evelyn, you look tired. Here, have some champagne. You deserve it." She extended the glass, the rim catching the light like a polished dagger. I thanked her, took the glass, and raised it just enough to satisfy appearances. But in my chest, I already knew I wasn't drinking a drop, because the glass wasn't a gift. It was a sentence, and I had no intention of letting it be mine. The thing about traps is simple. They work best when the prey doesn't realize it's been spotted, and I wasn't about to let Vanessa know I'd seen everything. I held the poisoned glass lightly, smiling as if nothing in the world was amiss. Around us, guests clinked their flutes. The saxophonist crooned in the corner, and Atlanta's skyline sparkled through the glass windows. It was a picture of celebration, but to me, every second stretched into a chess match. 10 minutes later, when Vanessa drifted off to show her tennis bracelet to one of my neighbors, I moved. Not dramatically, not with suspicion, just casually, like a woman reaching for hors d'oeuvres. My eyes scanned the room and landed on Loretta, Vanessa's own mother. She stood a few feet away, clutching her purse, looking lost without a drink in her hand. Loretta was harmless, scatterbrained, sweet, the kind of woman who never noticed details. I set my flute down on the edge of the bar near her and stepped aside, as if distracted by conversation. Right on cue, Loretta reached for it, smiling in relief as though the universe had delivered her a forgotten blessing. "Don't mind if I do," she murmured, lifting the glass to her lips. My chest tightened. I hadn't planned for her to be the one to take it, but the opportunity was too neat, too natural, and stopping her would have raised more questions than answers. So I watched as she sipped, her brow furrowing slightly, watched as she complimented the champagne's interesting taste. I stayed calm, though inside I was ice. Because now the clock had started. Whatever Vanessa had poured into that glass was working its way into Loretta's system. And all I could think was, that wasn't supposed to happen to her. It happened fast, too fast. One moment, Loretta was laughing softly at something one of the neighbors had said. The next, the flute slipped from her hand and shattered against the marble floor. Her body convulsed violently, her knees buckling before she collapsed in front of the dessert table. Foam began to gather at the corners of her mouth. Gasps rippled through the room like a sudden storm. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. "Somebody call 911!" Vanessa screamed, her voice sharp and high-pitched. She dropped to her knees beside her mother, shaking her shoulders with frantic urgency. To anyone else, she looked like a devastated daughter fighting to save her parent. But to me, it was theater, well-rehearsed, too polished. I'd seen genuine panic before, and this wasn't it. Guests backed away, horrified, whispering in frantic tones. The band stopped playing mid-note. A few people hovered trying to help, but no one knew what to do. I stepped forward, knelt by Loretta's side, and pressed 2 fingers gently against her pulse. Weak, but still there. Behind me, I heard Darius pushing through the crowd. What happened? His voice cracked, his face pale as he took in the scene. His eyes darted, not to his mother-in-law, but to Vanessa. Just a flicker, but I caught it. A look that said he wasn't as surprised as he should have been. "She just collapsed," Vanessa sobbed, clutching my arm. 1 minute she was fine. The next, her words dissolved into a choked cry. The sirens arrived within minutes, flashing red and blue across the rooftop glass. Paramedics rushed in, lifting Loretta onto a stretcher, their voices brisk and professional. "Acute poisoning," I heard one of them murmur to his partner. "Cause unknown." As they wheeled her out, the party dissolved into uneasy silence. Guests avoided my eyes, unsure of what they'd just witnessed. And me? I kept my expression calm, but inside, one truth screamed louder than the sirens fading into the night. That poison wasn't meant for Loretta. It was meant for me. I wasn't about to let them keep me at the rooftop while they figured out what had gone wrong with their plan. As the paramedics wheeled Loretta out, Vanessa clung to my son's arm, her face blotched with mascara streaks. "We'll go with her," she insisted. "Evelyn, you should stay here, rest. We'll handle everything." Her words dripped with false sweetness, but I heard the edge beneath. Keep the target isolated. Keep me away from the one person who could blow their secret. "Nonsense," I said firmly, grabbing my coat and purse. "Loretta's practically family. I'll follow in my own car." The look Vanessa shot me, half surprise, half irritation, told me I'd made the right choice. Darius opened his mouth to protest, but thought better of it when he caught my eye. Even at 35, he still remembered the tone in my voice that meant the discussion was over. At St. Joseph's Hospital, the waiting room hummed with fluorescent light and nervous energy. Loretta had been rushed into critical care, her condition listed as serious but stable. I stayed close enough to overhear every word the doctors exchanged. Plant alkaloids, one murmured. Not food poisoning, not medication. Something deliberate. Vanessa paced the floor, her heels clacking against the linoleum like a metronome counting down the seconds. "This is terrible. Just terrible," she repeated, the words hollow from overuse. Darius sat stiff in a plastic chair, his phone buzzing constantly. He didn't answer. His jaw worked as though he was chewing on a confession he couldn't swallow. When I gently mentioned how lucky Loretta was that she hadn't finished the champagne, Vanessa froze. Her hand shook as she lifted her coffee cup, eyes darting toward me with a flicker of fear. She tried to cover it with a nervous laugh, but I'd seen it. The slip, the tell. Hours later, the doctor returned to say Loretta would likely recover. Relief swept the room. But for me, it wasn't relief at all. It was confirmation. This hadn't been an accident. It had been an attempt, and I was still the intended prize. Back at home, the city lights of Atlanta glowed outside my window, but I felt like I was living in a fortress under siege. My house, once a sanctuary filled with family dinners and Sunday gospel music, now seemed colder, too quiet. Even the hum of the refrigerator sounded suspicious, like a reminder that I was alone. I poured myself a fresh glass of champagne, this time from a sealed bottle I had opened with my own hands. The bubbles fizzed up, bright and harmless. I let the glass sit untouched on my desk as I opened a leather-bound notebook, the same one I used years ago when I built my consulting firm from scratch. Old habits die hard. Research and strategy had always been my strongest weapons. Tonight, I needed them more than ever. I listed everything I knew. Vanessa's sudden enthusiasm for the party, the vial she slipped into my glass, Loretta collapsing after a single sip, the doctors whispering about plant alkaloids, and Darius, my own son, watching it all unfold with an unease that felt less like surprise and more like guilt. On another page, I wrote down their financial reality. I didn't need receipts to know they were drowning. Darius's architecture firm had been limping along since the recession, and Vanessa's boutique jewelry business bled more cash than it ever earned. Their mortgage, their cars, the designer clothes she flaunted like armor, it all added up to one thing: desperation. I had given them money before. Help with tuition for my granddaughter, down payments, gifts, I told myself were acts of love. But now I saw it for what it was. To them, those gifts weren't generosity. They were advance payments on an inheritance they didn't want to wait for. The clock ticked past midnight. I stared at the list, the evidence growing darker with every line. This wasn't paranoia. This was a plan, and it wasn't finished yet. The next morning, I called the one person I trusted more than anyone outside my bloodline, my attorney, Marcus Bell. Marcus had been with me for over 20 years, through contracts, acquisitions, and the messy legal storms that come with running a multi-million-dollar firm. He was sharp, precise, and carried the kind of calm that made even the dirtiest fight feel winnable. His office overlooked downtown Atlanta, all polished wood and steel, with walls lined by leather-bound casebooks that smelled faintly of power. When I stepped in, Marcus rose, adjusted his glasses, and gave me a look that was half curiosity, half concern. "Evelyn," he said, motioning me to sit. "Your message sounded urgent. What's happened?" So I told him. Everything. From the rooftop party to Loretta's collapse, from Vanessa's trembling hands to Darius's nervous glances. I laid it all out on the table, every detail, like evidence in a trial. Marcus didn't interrupt. He just took notes, his pen scratching across yellow legal paper. When I finished, the silence in the room was thick enough to cut. Finally, he leaned back. "You're certain about what you saw?" "As certain as I've ever been about anything," I said, my voice steady. He nodded slowly. "Then, you need to understand something, Evelyn. If they were willing to try poison once, they'll try again. And if they can't take you out physically, they'll come for you legally. Competency challenges, guardianship petitions. At your age, it won't be hard for them to build a case if you don't prepare." I felt my jaw tighten. "Then, we prepare." Marcus's thin smile returned. He pulled a thick file from his cabinet. "First, we'll document your mental state with a trusted psychiatrist. Then, we restructure your estate. Trusts, directives, safeguards. If Darius and Vanessa want to play games with your fortune, we'll make sure they're playing by rules you wrote." For the first time since the champagne glass slipped from Loretta's hand, I felt something other than fear. I felt control returning. Marcus and I spent the next 2 hours plotting like generals before a war. He laid out every possible angle Vanessa and Darius might use, and I countered each one with the same instincts that once kept my business alive through recessions and betrayals. First, competency. "They'll try to paint you as confused or incapable," Marcus said. "So we'll get ahead of that. I'll arrange for a full evaluation by a reputable geriatric psychiatrist, someone the courts respect. Once it's on record, it's hard to challenge." "Good," I said, jotting it down. My handwriting was steady, bold. I wanted it clear, even in ink, that I wasn't a woman to be dismissed. Next came the money. "We'll restructure your estate into a trust," Marcus explained. "That way, even if they somehow gained guardianship, they couldn't touch the principal. You decide who gets what, and you lock it down tight." "And what if they push me into some fancy retirement home to isolate me?" I asked. "Then the trust will contain a clause," Marcus replied. "If anyone tries to alter your living arrangements without your consent, funds freeze automatically. No access, no leverage." I smiled for the first time in days. Now that's my kind of insurance. Finally, security. Marcus leaned forward, his voice low. "If they've already tried poison, Evelyn, you need to think about physical safety. Cameras, alarms, a panic button that goes straight to the police." I thought about my quiet house, once filled with gospel and laughter, now shadowed with suspicion. A fortress needed defending. "Do it," I said. "All of it. Let's make this house harder to break than Fort Knox." Marcus closed his file, satisfied. "Then, you'll be ready." As I walked out of his office into the bright Atlanta sun, one thing was certain. My family thought they were playing me, but they had no idea I'd just rewritten the rules of the game. That evening, just as the last technician finished installing the new security cameras, my doorbell rang. On the monitor, I saw them, Darius and Vanessa, standing side by side on my porch, both trying to look calm but failing miserably. I opened the door slowly, wearing the same smile I'd perfected in boardrooms when I wanted the other side to think they were winning. "Evening, children. Come on in." They settled on my living room sofa. Vanessa perched on the edge, her legs crossed too tightly, her hands fidgeting with her diamond bracelet. Darius leaned back, trying for relaxed, but his eyes kept darting toward the new camera in the corner. "New security?" he asked lightly. "Package theft's been a problem in the neighborhood," I answered smoothly. "Can't be too careful." Vanessa cleared her throat, her voice dripping with rehearsed concern. "Evelyn, we've been thinking a lot about what happened to Mama at the party. If it had been you, well, we'd never forgive ourselves. We think it might be best if you stayed with us for a while, just until things settle." The air in the room tightened. I let the silence stretch, studying their faces. Vanessa's eyes gleamed with false sympathy. Darius's jaw clenched, waiting for me to agree. "That's thoughtful," I said finally, my voice warm but steady. "But I'm perfectly safe here." Vanessa leaned forward, her tone sharper. "Are you, though? You're 72, living alone. What if you fell? What if you had a heart attack?" I smiled, the kind that showed teeth but no kindness. "Funny you should mention that. I spent the day updating my will. Amazing what a scare will make you think about." Their expressions faltered, just for a moment, but I caught it. The flicker of panic when a plan starts slipping. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands. "Don't worry, children. I've made sure everything's in order. No surprises." The way they exchanged glances told me one thing loud and clear. Surprises were the last thing they wanted. The next morning, just as I was settling down with a cup of coffee and my garden blooming in the early Atlanta sun, the doorbell rang. On the monitor, I saw Loretta, Vanessa's mother, standing there, pale but determined, clutching her handbag like it was a lifeline. I invited her in, and she lowered herself gingerly into an armchair. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady. "Evelyn, I need to talk to you about that night." She explained how the doctors told her she must have had some sort of reaction to medication. Then she looked me dead in the eye. "But I don't take any medication, not a single pill, except vitamins." I leaned forward, my heart drumming, waiting for her to continue. "I remember the champagne," Loretta whispered. "It tasted strange, bitter. And before that, I saw Vanessa at the table, fiddling with a little bottle. Looked like one of those droppers people use for essential oils." Her hands shook as she wrapped them tighter around her purse. "Evelyn, I think my daughter tried to poison you, and instead," her voice broke, "instead, I drank it." For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking clock on my mantel. I watched this woman, torn between a mother's instinct to protect her child and the raw truth sitting heavy on her chest. "You're not wrong," I said finally. "I saw her." I switched the glasses. Loretta gasped, the color draining from her face. "Lord have mercy. She really meant to kill you." "Yes," I said quietly, "and you nearly paid the price for her greed." We sat in silence, two women bound by betrayal from the very people who should have loved us most. But silence soon hardened into resolve. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I looked her straight in the eye. "I'm going to give them exactly what they want, just not the way they think they'll get it." By the time Loretta left my house, I already knew what my next move had to be. Business had taught me long ago. When people show you their hunger, you'd better find out how deep it goes. And for that, I needed someone who could dig where I couldn't. So I picked up the phone and called Patricia Green. Patricia wasn't the kind of private investigator you found in the yellow pages. She'd cut her teeth in corporate espionage, running background checks on competitors, and sniffing out dirty deals before they could burn me. More than once, her work had saved me millions. "Evelyn Carter," she said when she picked up, her voice carrying that cool mix of respect and curiosity. "Haven't heard from you since the restaurant sale. What's going on?" "I need a personal favor," I told her. "I want to know everything about my son's finances. And Vanessa's, too. Bank accounts, credit cards, mortgages, loans. If they've been hiding it, I want it uncovered." There was a pause, heavy with warning. "Evelyn, I've done this before for other families. I'll tell you now. It can be ugly. Are you sure you want to know?" "I don't just want to know," I said firmly. "I need to." Patricia didn't waste time. "Give me 48 hours. I'll get you the truth." When I hung up, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time since the party, I felt like I wasn't just dodging blows. I was lining up my own strike. I poured myself another cup of coffee, leaned back in my chair, and let the weight of the decision sink in. If Patricia uncovered what I suspected, there'd be no going back. But then again, I'd never been one to back away from the truth. 2 days later, I called Darius and asked him to meet me for lunch at Harold's Diner in Harlem. The place had been our little spot since his college days, a place where we once celebrated his graduation with greasy burgers and banana cream pie. The floors were still checkered black and white, the booth still covered in cracked red leather, and the smell of fried catfish clung to the air like a memory. For me, it was nostalgia. For him, it was a trap he didn't even know he was walking into. He slid into the booth across from me, his movements uneasy. His tie was crooked, and his eyes carried the weight of too many sleepless nights. He picked up the laminated menu, though I knew he wasn't reading it. His hands trembled slightly as he put it back down. "Mom," he said, his voice rough. "You sounded serious on the phone. Is everything okay?" I stirred my coffee slowly, letting the spoon clink against the cup. "I've been thinking about what you and Vanessa suggested, about Sunset Manor. Maybe it isn't such a bad idea after all." His eyes snapped to mine, wide with relief and something sharper, greed. He leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "Mom, that's wonderful. It's safe, it's comfortable, and you won't have to worry about anything anymore. I really think you'll like it there." I nodded, keeping my expression soft, even thoughtful. Let him believe he was winning. Let him taste the victory. Then I slid the bait onto the table. "There's 1 unit available, but the director told me it won't last. The entrance fee is steep, nearly $500,000, and they want it settled by the end of the week." Darius's fingers tapped the tabletop, a nervous rhythm that betrayed his excitement. "That's not a problem, right? You have the money from the sale." "Of course," I said smoothly, sipping my coffee. "But they also mentioned something else. They require a power of attorney, someone to manage finances if I'm ever unable to. I was hoping you'd take that on." I watched his face light up, his shoulders relaxing as though the burden of all his debts had just evaporated. "Of course, Mom. I'll take care of everything. You can count on me." I smiled, the same smile I used to give him when he was a boy, and thought he'd gotten away with stealing cookies from the jar. Let him think he'd won. let him believe I was old and gullible. All the while, I was memorizing every flicker of his expression, every twitch of his hands. Because in that moment, I knew exactly how far gone my son was. He wasn't thinking about my safety, my happiness, or even my dignity. He was thinking about the number in my bank account and how fast he could make it his own. And that was fine. Let him underestimate me. I had built an empire once, and I could build a trap just as easily. What Darius didn't realize was that I had just given him a role in a game I'd already won. Patricia called me on a gray Thursday morning, her voice clipped and professional, but I could hear the edge underneath. "Evelyn, I've got your report. You might want to sit down." I already was. Notebook open, pen ready. "Tell me." "They're drowning," she began. "Your son's architecture firm hasn't turned a profit in 2 years. They've refinanced the house 3 times, maxed out credit cards, and they're $80,000 in the hole. They're paying one card with another just to stay afloat." I pressed my lips together, but she wasn't finished. "Vanessa's boutique. A shell. It brings in pennies compared to what she spends. Designer clothes, trips, jewelry. It's all smoke and mirrors. Bought on credit they can't afford." I felt the confirmation settle heavy in my chest. I had known they were desperate, but not this desperate. Patricia hesitated before dropping the hammer. 6 months ago, Vanessa took out a $500,000 life insurance policy. On you. She listed herself as the beneficiary, claiming she was your caregiver. My blood ran cold. She what? It's legal, barely, but suspicious. And there's more. Darius has been making regular payments to a Dr. Richard Holloway, geriatric psychiatrist, known for competency evaluations that tend to favor families who want control of an elder's estate. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Poison to speed up the process, a nursing home to isolate me, a doctor ready to sign away my independence, and money, always money, waiting at the end of it. "Thank you, Patricia," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Send me everything. Every receipt, every signature, every call log." When I hung up, I stared out the window at the Atlanta skyline, gleaming in the distance like a fortress of steel and glass. My own family had turned into predators, but predators forget. Sometimes the prey learns how to bite back, and I was about to show them just how sharp my teeth still were. Friday morning dawned gray and heavy, the kind of Atlanta day that felt like the sky itself was holding its breath. Darius and Vanessa arrived at my house right on time, both dressed like they were walking into a board meeting. Vanessa carried a sleek leather briefcase. Darius wore that forced smile he always used when he thought he was in control. We sat around my dining table, papers neatly spread out like a feast. Vanessa slid the stack toward me, her manicured nails tapping against the cover page. "Here's the admission paperwork for Sunset Manor," she said sweetly, "and here's the power of attorney form. Once you sign, everything will be taken care of." I picked up the pen, turning it slowly between my fingers. My heart was steady, my face unreadable. "It's a big step," I murmured. "That's why we're here," Darius assured me, leaning forward. "To help you. You won't regret this." I bent over the papers and signed each one carefully, the scratch of the pen echoing in the silence. Vanessa's eyes glittered, triumph flashing in her smile. Darius exhaled like a man watching his payday roll in. When I pushed the stack back across the table, Vanessa clutched it like treasure. "Perfect," she said. "We'll handle the rest. I folded my hands and looked at them both. One more thing. My attorney will need to finalize some details before the funds transfer. He's on his way here. Vanessa stiffened. Is that necessary? Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. But it wasn't Marcus Bell standing outside. It was Detective Morrison and her partner, badges gleaming under the porch light. "Mrs. Carter," she said briskly, stepping inside, "we need to discuss a suspected poisoning at your retirement party, and we believe these two might know something about it." The room froze. Vanessa's face drained of color. Darius's hand slipped from the paperwork like it had suddenly burned him. And me? I just sat back, calm as a queen on her throne. The game had shifted, and they never saw it coming. Detective Morrison didn't waste any time. She stepped into my living room as though she owned it, her dark suit crisp, her eyes sharp enough to slice through glass. Her partner followed quietly, already flipping open a notebook. "Mrs. Carter," Morrison said, her tone even. "We've just received toxicology reports from St. Luke's Hospital. Your guest, Mrs. Loretta Johnson, didn't collapse because of any medication. She ingested a concentrated dose of oleander extract. That's a deadly poison." The words dropped into the room like a grenade. Vanessa gasped, clutching her chest as if she were the victim. Poison? That's insane. My mother must have taken the wrong pills. She's been forgetful lately. Morrison tilted her head, unimpressed. Except Mrs. Johnson doesn't take any prescription medication. Not a single pill. But we tested the champagne she drank, along with the bottle it came from. Both contained oleander, which tells us someone deliberately tampered with it. I turned my eyes toward Vanessa, calm but unyielding. She was pale under her makeup, her composure cracking like glass under heat. Darius shifted in his chair, looking from his wife to the detectives, panic flickering behind his eyes. "That doesn't make sense," Vanessa insisted, her voice rising. "Why would I poison my own mother? Do you hear how ridiculous that sounds?" Morrison was ready. She reached into her folder, pulled out a sheet of paper, and slid it across the table. "What makes more sense is this. 6 months ago, you took out a $500,000 life insurance policy on Mrs. Carter. You listed yourself as the beneficiary. Not your husband, not your daughter. You." The silence was suffocating. Even the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen seemed louder than normal. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping on dry land. That's not a crime. I was protecting her. She's 70 years old. If something happened to her, I'd be the one taking care of the estate. That's why. I leaned forward, my voice cutting through her excuses. "I saw you, Vanessa, at the party. You poured something into my glass. I switched it with Loretta's. Don't insult me by pretending this was an accident." Her face drained of blood. Darius whipped his head toward her, his voice breaking. "Vanessa, tell me she's lying. Tell me you didn't." "I didn't," Vanessa screamed, but the shrill edge in her voice betrayed her. She was no longer the polished hostess with the sparkling smile. She was cornered prey, lashing out. "This is all a setup. You can't prove anything." Detective Morrison folded her arms. "Actually, we can, and you'll have plenty of time to explain yourself downtown." The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was louder than any scream, echoing through the room like a final verdict. Vanessa's eyes burned with rage as she turned to me, spitting venom. You think you've won, old woman? This isn't over. But for me, it was. I sat back in my chair, steady as stone, watching the performance crumble. Vanessa had always underestimated me, mistaking kindness for weakness, age for frailty. She thought money blinded me to motives, but I had seen the truth long before the poison touched that glass. And now the whole world would see it too. The air in my living room was heavy, the kind of silence that follows thunder. Vanessa sat cuffed on the sofa, her mascara streaking as she muttered under her breath. Darius stood frozen, his hands clenching and unclenching, as if he could squeeze the truth back into hiding. Detective Morrison turned her attention to him. "Mr. Carter, did you know about your wife's actions, about the poison?" His voice cracked. "No. God, no. I would never—" "I didn't know she was going to try to kill my mother." His eyes flicked to me, wide, pleading. "Mom, you have to believe me." I studied him the way I used to study contracts, looking for the fine print that always told the real story. He looked broken, but behind that I saw something else. Guilt. Not surprise. Not shock. Guilt. Morrison's partner cleared his throat and held up a tablet. "We obtained text messages between you and your wife from the past month. Want me to read a few?" Darius's face drained of color. "That's private." The detective ignored him. "Vanessa, did you talk to your mom about Sunset Manor?" Darius: "Yes. She's considering it." Vanessa: "Good. The sooner we get her moved, the better. She's asking too many questions about our finances." My son's knees buckled, and he dropped into a chair. Morrison continued, her tone flat. "And here's one from just 2 nights before the party. Vanessa, she won't change her mind. Not after tomorrow night." Darius: "What's happening tomorrow?" Vanessa: "Trust me, by Sunday, she'll be begging us to take care of her." I looked at him, my heart both aching and hardened. "You knew," I said quietly. "Maybe not the poison, but you knew something was coming." He buried his face in his hands. "I thought it was just a scare tactic. I thought she was going to stage something, make you feel unsafe. I swear I didn't think she'd—" But his excuses hung limp in the air. The truth was out. My son, my only child, had been ready to let me fall. For a long moment, the living room was a pressure cooker, heat rising with every breath. Vanessa sat cuffed, mascara streaking like war paint, while Darius slumped forward, his elbows on his knees, as if he could fold himself into a smaller man than the one he had become. The detectives hovered, silent but watchful. That was when I decided the time had come to deal the final card. I reached for the leather folder on the coffee table and slid it toward Detective Morrison. "Before you go, Detective, there's something you should see," I said, my voice calm, almost conversational. I could feel Vanessa's eyes boring into me, sharp as daggers. Darius lifted his head, confusion and dread battling for dominance across his face. "You're talking about the power of attorney papers," I continued, locking eyes with my son. "The ones I signed for you last week." Darius nodded quickly, almost desperately. "Yes, Mom. I only suggested it because—" I cut him off, my tone crisp. "They're fake." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Darius blinked. "What?" I slid the documents across the polished wood, their weight heavier than any weapon. Detective Morrison picked them up, skimming the pages, her lips twitching into a half-smile. "These don't grant broad control over her finances," she confirmed, tapping the top sheet. In fact, they only authorize management of one single account. Vanessa lurched forward, cuffed hands clinking. "Which account?" she hissed, desperation cracking through her voice. I leaned back, savoring the moment. An account with exactly $1 in it. The silence shattered as Darius's face drained of color, his mouth working but no words forming. Vanessa cursed under her breath, thrashing against the cuffs like an animal caught in a trap. I pressed on, my voice steady, deliberate, the same voice that once closed $1,000,000 contracts. The real money, the company sale, the assets, everything, is untouchable, locked away in a series of trusts. And here's the best part. If anyone ever tries to have me declared incompetent, the funds automatically transfer to charity, cancer research, scholarships for kids who remind me of myself when I was young, community programs. Not one dime goes to either of you. Detective Morrison raised her brows, clearly impressed. That's airtight. Smart move, Mrs. Carter. Darius clutched his head in his hands, his voice breaking. Mom, you tricked me. I shook my head slowly, sadness mixing with steel. No, Darius. I protected myself. You tried to trick me. You both thought I was old, vulnerable, and blind. But I didn't build an empire by being stupid. Vanessa spat, her face twisted with rage. You think this is over? You think you've won? I met her fury with cold calm. No, Vanessa, I don't think I've won. I know I have. The room grew still again, the ticking clock on the mantel the only sound. Darius sat hollow, a shadow of the boy I once rocked to sleep. Vanessa seethed, her future already written in the hands of the justice system. And me, I simply exhaled, steady and unbroken. Detective Morrison snapped her notebook shut. That'll do for now. Vanessa Carter, you're under arrest for attempted murder. And Darius Carter, you'll want to find yourself a lawyer. Conspiracy charges have a way of sticking. As they escorted Vanessa out, I poured myself a glass of water, the ice clinking gently. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, my hand didn't shake. This wasn't just about surviving. This was about victory. Victory earned by outsmarting those who thought age was a weakness. They wanted me powerless. Instead, they'd reminded me exactly how much power I still had. The courthouse smelled of old wood and paper, the kind of scent that carries the weight of generations of judgment. I sat quietly in the second row, my navy blue suit pressed, and my pearl earrings gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I hadn't worn pearls since my husband's funeral. Today felt like a day that required armor. The judge entered, his robe swaying like a curtain, and everyone rose. Vanessa was led into the courtroom first, hands shackled, her once perfect manicure chipped beyond recognition. She still tried to tilt her chin, still tried to radiate confidence, but the fluorescent lights were crueler than any spotlight. There was no hiding the fear in her eyes. The prosecution laid it out plainly. The insurance policy, the poison, the toxicology reports, and even her own careless text messages. Vanessa had been meticulous with her appearance, but sloppy with her planning. 15 years. That was her sentence. 15 years, where no amount of designer handbags or salon visits could shield her from the truth. Then it was Darius's turn. My son. He looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders slumped in his gray suit, his tie crooked. He didn't look like the boy who once stood tall on his graduation day. He looked like a man who had gambled everything and lost. His lawyer painted a picture of desperation, not malice. They argued he hadn't known about the poison, that his only crime was trusting the wrong woman. But the jury had the text messages. The jury saw his silence when it mattered most. And in the end, silence can be as deadly as action. 3 years. That was his fate. 3 years in federal prison. Not enough to erase the ache in my chest, but long enough for him to sit with his choices. Long enough for him to wonder if siding with greed was worth the cost of his family. As the gavel came down, I didn't feel triumphant. My heart ached in ways I didn't know it still could. I had built companies, survived the cutthroat world of business, and buried a husband far too soon. But nothing compared to watching my only child be led away in handcuffs. And yet, beneath the sorrow, there was relief. Relief that the law had spoken. Relief that my story hadn't ended on a marble kitchen floor with a poisoned glass of champagne. Relief that, even though I had lost my son to his own choices, I had kept my life, my dignity, and my freedom. Justice had a bitter taste, but it was justice all the same. After the trials ended and the reporters moved on to their next scandal, life settled into something quieter, almost fragile. My granddaughter, Maya, began visiting me every weekend. 16 years old, sharp as a whip, and already carrying the kind of maturity no teenager should have to bear. One Saturday afternoon, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands curled around a mug of hot chocolate. "Grandma," she said softly, "I'm sorry. I didn't know what they were planning. I swear I didn't." Her eyes brimmed with tears, and in them I saw not Vanessa's hunger for wealth or Darius's weakness, but something new. Innocence fighting to survive disappointment. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Sweetheart, you don't carry their sins. You're not responsible for the choices your parents made." Maya nodded, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled. She told me about her dream of studying law, about wanting to defend people who couldn't defend themselves. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. Maybe the cycle would break with her. Maybe this mess had planted a seed of strength in the next generation. Helen Peterson, surprisingly, had become something of an ally. Twice a week we met at a little cafe near Central Park. 2 women bound together by betrayal, sharing laughter over strong coffee. "Who would have thought," she said once, chuckling, "that nearly dying at your party would give me a new best friend?" We laughed harder than either of us had in months. With Maya's youthful determination and Helen's steady companionship, the hole left by Darius's choices didn't feel quite as bottomless. My house no longer echoed with loneliness. Instead, it carried the hum of possibility, the murmur of new bonds forming where old ones had fractured. In the wake of destruction, something unexpected was blooming. Family, not by blood, but by choice. In the months that followed, I worked closely with my attorney to lock down every cent of my assets. Trust funds, medical directives, clauses that left no room for manipulation. It was all airtight now. Money, once the source of pride for building my firm, had become a battlefield. But I wasn't going to let it define me anymore. Instead, I invested in causes that mattered. Scholarships for underprivileged Black students who reminded me of myself at 17, standing on the edge of opportunity with no safety net. Community programs in Harlem that gave kids a place to learn, to play, to dream bigger than their block, cancer research, because life should be measured by how many people you save, not how much you hoard. Through it all, I kept asking myself, what is the true measure of a life well lived? Is it the money you leave behind, or the love you protect while you're here? Looking back, I realized this wasn't just about surviving an attempted murder. It was about reclaiming my power, about proving that age doesn't equal weakness, and that wisdom, sharpened by experience, is the greatest weapon of all. And now, I turn that question to you, the one listening to my story. If the people closest to you betrayed you for money, what would you do? Forgive them, fight them, or outsmart them? I've made my choice. I chose to fight, and to win. If my story touched you, if it made you think twice about trust, greed, or resilience, then do me one favor. Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below telling me what lesson you'd take from my journey. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us. Even when life throws its darkest battles, we are never powerless, unless we choose to be. Because at 70 years old, I learned something I want you to remember. Survival isn't the end game. Living well, on your own terms, is the ultimate victory.